Trump strikes Ukraine. After excluding Ukraine from talks about its future, Trump has hit Kiev hard, accusing it of starting the war and criticizing President Zelensky's legitimacy. Things looked as if they couldn't get any worse for Ukraine's leaders, until US President Donald Trump held a press conference at his Mar-a-Lago estate on February 18. The event was supposed to announce the results of US-Russia talks in Saudi Arabia. But what got the most attention was Trump's attacks on Ukraine, a country that the US has supported wholeheartedly for nearly 3 years. After excluding President Volodymyr Zelensky from the first US-Russia talks on ending the war, President Trump has now turned to accusing Ukraine of starting the conflict that has devastated the country. I hear them say, "Oh, we weren't invited, but you haven't found a solution in 3 years. You should have ended the war in 3 years. And you should have never started it. You should have made a deal." Trump said. This is the first time a US president has said that Ukraine started the conflict. Trump's predecessor, President Joe Biden, has repeatedly accused Russia of being the instigator of the conflict for nearly 3 years and has insisted that Ukraine has the right to defend itself. Russia, meanwhile, has blamed Ukraine's desire to join NATO as one of the reasons it launched the war. After accusing Ukraine of creating the problem, Trump said things would have been very different if he had been US president when Russia launched its attack in February 2022. "I could have made a deal where Ukraine kept all of its land and no people were killed. No cities were destroyed. No buildings were blown up," the US president said. But they chose not to do it that way. However, Mr. Trump did not explain why he did not conduct such negotiations in 2020. At the end of his first term, when Russia had massed hundreds of thousands of troops along the Ukrainian border, causing many tensions with the US and its allies in Europe. After 4 years, he declared that he was the one who could solve the problem. "I think I have the power to end the conflict. And I think things are going very well," the White House owner said of the meeting between US and Russian officials in Saudi Arabia to discuss the war in Ukraine without the participation of Kiev. And in his harshest comments yet on Ukraine's leadership, the US president echoed another view of his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin, that it was time for elections in Ukraine, taking a direct aim at President Zelensky's legitimacy. "We haven't had elections in Ukraine in a long time. That's not Russia's opinion. That's my opinion and many other countries. You have a leadership that is allowing war to happen that should never have happened," he said, comparing Ukrainian cities to demolition sites. "These cities look like Gaza," the president said. "Most of them are tilting. Buildings are falling apart." President Trump also warned that for his views to be heard, Ukraine would need to hold elections. "You know, if they want to have a seat at the table, they have to give the Ukrainian people a voice. And they haven't had elections in a long time," he stressed. Experts say Trump's comments are a clear attempt to sideline Zelensky in his efforts to restore relations with Russia. They continue to raise concerns in Kiev and Europe, which was also excluded from the US-Russia talks in Saudi Arabia, that the US leader will try to impose a peace deal in Ukraine that is favorable to Russia. Ukraine's elections were scheduled for April last year, but President Zelensky said voters could not vote in wartime, a view supported by the country's constitution. Trump's comments also appear to contradict assurances from Secretary of State Marco Rubio after a meeting with the Russian delegation that the final peace deal would be fair to all sides. On the other hand, President Trump's attack on the Ukrainian leader, who was once praised by the US as a hero for resisting Russia's blitzkrieg campaign early in the conflict, is another sign that the new US administration has reversed its long-standing stance of isolating Russia and supporting Ukraine for as long as necessary. Veteran commentator Stephen Collinson from CNN assessed, within Trump's team, the shift is seen as necessary to correct years of misguided policies. According to observers, the president and his allies see the cost of defending Europe and Ukraine as too high. In that view, reaching some compromise with Russia would allow the US to redirect national security resources to other places, such as China, which they see as the greatest threat. And the US's reversal has been carefully prepared over the past week, just days after Vice President J.D. Vance sharply criticized European allies, saying that threats from within the continent were more worrisome than Russia. Secretary of State Rubio met with his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov and spoke of incredible opportunities for cooperation between the two sides if they could resolve the war in Ukraine. Many of President Trump's decisions over the past month have left European allies confused, as he has not only excluded them from talks on Ukraine but also threatened tariffs, demanded more military spending and made demands on some of the continent's leaders. In the eyes of Europe, Trump is normalizing relations with Russia while treating them, America's allies, as untrustworthy, said Ian Bremmer, president of the New York-based international consulting firm Eurasia Group. President Trump pledged during the election campaign to end the conflict in Ukraine within 24 hours. Something he has failed to do. He repeatedly vowed to bring peace to Ukraine even before taking office. Something that has also failed to materialize. After the Trump-Putin phone call, U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said that Ukraine's admission to NATO and Kiev's ambitions to regain all of its territory were unrealistic. This signals that the U.S. position on a potential peace settlement is closer to Russia's goal of preventing Ukraine from joining NATO and maintaining control over the annexed territories. The statements made by President Trump and his team so far appear to be in line with the Kremlin's wishes. Russia will retain all of the territory it controls in Ukraine. The US will not provide Ukraine with security guarantees or allow it to join NATO. The unprecedented sanctions the US has imposed on Russia will be lifted. President Trump's confidence in his ability to reach a deal with President Putin has left veteran US national security officials puzzled. When you negotiate with Russia, you try to find overlapping interests, but you realize that they are fundamentally in conflict with American interests. We are trying to negotiate with a formidable adversary, not a close friend, said Celeste A. Wallander, who handled Russia and Ukraine issues as Assistant Secretary of Defense under President Joe Biden. Speaking to reporters on February 18, President Trump again showed that he sees Russia as a friend, not Ukraine. Russia wants to do that. They want to stop the barbaric violence, he said. The president also sought to discredit his Ukrainian counterpart, claiming that Zelensky's approval rating had dropped to 4%. Zelensky's approval rating has actually dropped over the 3 years of conflict, but only to around 50%. It is unclear where Trump got the 4% figure. Trump's remarks were not scripted but were direct responses to reporters. But they reflect his view of the situation and foreshadow the US policy he will pursue in the coming months. They have also sent shockwaves through Europe, which is grappling with the reality that its main ally no longer sees it the same way. According to Ian Bond, Deputy Director of the Center for European Reform,